Hi everyone, Angus Campbell here, Sunday the 11th of April 2020. Right, back on to the A70 Lightning now that firstly we've finished the majority of the wiring on the Fury, but secondly some parts have arrived at last, and what we've primarily been waiting for are throttle cables, and these are a bit difficult to get hold of at the moment. And I've had some on back order for a while, but not knowing when they're going to arrive. And then I found another supplier that had suitable cables that would fit, which are these. They're officially B25 SS, I think, but I think they'll fit. And then damn me if I didn't get confirmation as soon as these arrived that my back order had been filled and they're on the way as well. But anyway, that's by the by. So we can do control cables, i.e. throttle cables, so we'll take the tank off. We need to finish the front brake cable, and that's because, whoops, I'm waiting for parts down here, i.e. the ferrules for each of the arms and the spring in between, and they are on the way, but they're coming from abroad, so I don't know when they'll arrive, and getting those parts is pretty difficult. So what I've done in the meantime is actually dig out or see what the originals were like, 'cause I never really paid much attention, and I've kept all the original parts off the bike, and actually they're not bad. They clean up quite well. They were actually covered mainly in oil rather than rust, so I think we're going to clean those up and use those. So we've got that to do, and we've got the front brake to adjust, but also as well what we need to do at some point is just obviously tidy up all the wiring that's now completed underneath the tank there, but we can't do that until we've got all the control cables in place, really, so we can actually tie everything up together with the proper metal bendy tie wraps. But we're not far off doing that. We'll only have the lower end choke cables left to do, so we might be able to do the front end of that. And then finally, once we've done that, I think we're in a position then to put oil in the motor, i.e. the main oil tank, and then we've got the separate reservoir for the primary chain case and the separate reservoir obviously for the gearbox. And what we'll do then is we'll put it on the rollers, and we'll turn it over gently on the rollers, and in that way then we can firstly check oil feed, check oil return, and also check oil pressure, because the oil pressure light, warning light and warning light switch are working, so we can do that. So a few bits and pieces to do, the little detail jobs, and we'll carry on. And I think also what we've got to do is find a speedo cable. I've got several in stock, but we just need to get one the right length. Like the tacho cable with the grey framers, these were originally grey. On some of them anyway, they were in pretty short supply. I do have one or two grey cables, but I don't think I've got a speedo one long enough for this, so it might have to end up being black, but that's okay. We can live with that. Right, so oh, and the other final job is that although there's not one specified in the parts book, I'm going to put a seat retaining cable on this in common with the Fury, where that is specified, so that when you open the seat it sits in position, but it doesn't go too far over, because there is a risk that if it does flap over too far with a bit of a clonk, it will damage the right hand side panels, and we don't want that. So I'm making up a retainer wire. I'm not quite sure where it's going to be locked onto the frame, but I would imagine that's going to be quite a good candidate there, and then we'll just drill a hole in the seat at the base, in the base of the seat, and just screw it onto that. so we can do that. And I've already started to prepare a couple of cables to do that, with large loops on one end, and there will be short loops on the other end, but I won't put in these on until I've tested and fitted what the cable fixed at one end, so we can ensure we get the right length. So it's not too short and it's not too long. We've got some tolerances to play with, but that should be okay too. So first things first, let's get the tank off and get some of these jobs underway. The other thing as well to bear in mind before we do that is that the carburetors that I've got has got adjusters on the lid for both the choke and the throttle cables, and we only need the one for the choke cable. The one for the throttle cable doesn't require it because we're running two separate cables on this, which is correct, from a double cable twist grip. So what have I done with them? Here we are. So as you can see, at the carb end we've got a big ferrule, and that big ferrule doesn't fit into the adjuster, so we need to take the adjuster off and slightly drill the top of the carbs. Sounds a bit sacrilegious, I know, on those new carbs, but we're going to do it. Right, let's get the tank off and then we'll decide what we're going to do first. Right, so we've got the restraining cable fitted onto that bolt nut. It's with the earth cable, that doesn't matter. There's a full nut on there, which is good, and a lock nut. Now with this seat, we want it in such a position where it's back far enough so it doesn't keep falling forward, so you can use two hands underneath. So there we are, it sits in about that position on its own, and we're still well away from that bottom hinge there hitting the side panel if it goes too far, so we can go back a little bit more. And what we'll do now is measure up that cable. Well, what we'll do is grab that cable and measure it up for a fairly steep angle, so it's pretty efficient. Then we'll cut it, put a loop on it, put a small hole in the seat, drill a small hole in the seat and grub screw it. Right, so I'll get on with that now. Right, there we are, all done. Seat restrainer fitted, bottom mounting, and then the top mounting, just a little grub screw, and that works really well. It folds up as it goes down and hinges underneath, well away from catching on the side panel, or actually that's the ignition key down there, it catches on that too. So that's the seat and the under seat area officially done at last. So we'll close that up and there we go. And next job we'll do is fixing the front brake cable properly on the arms there. Now, as I say, I've been waiting for parts for this, and they're still on the way from abroad, but I have actually now refurbished the original. God, there's a massive bee in here. They're refurbished, dug out the original bits and refurbished. So there's the two ferrules, one for each arm, and there's the spring that sits in between along the cable. This ferrule sits at the on the front arm. You see the inner cable slots into that, and the nipple slots into there. And then inside the two legs of the arm, there's also a washer. This is new, and one I had to make up from another washer. And this sits inside, and was a later addition on the twins, on these brakes, because they had some instances where this whole ferrule popped out one side, moved across too far and popped out of one side of the two arms. So this washer was added so it would butt up against, let's see, on the other side it would be on the slotted side against this end of the ferrule to stop sideways movement of the ferrule. And then this end is for the back lever, so you get the outer cable on this side and the inner cable going through and through the spring. So that's basically the layout. So all we've got to do then is transfer this to the front brake, and then once we've done that, we can adjust the front brake, which is usually the major problem with these conical hub twin leading shoes, is when they're not working properly. It's either the brake shoes faces are not making much contact on the drum, or more likely it's because they're incorrectly adjusted on the verniers. And you can always usually tell when they are incorrectly adjusted because, for instance, let's check. If I look at the Rocket 3, you can see how those brake arms are just slightly diverging outwards, and that's a good indication that they're pretty well adjusted. Whereas on the Show Fury, which I've never touched at the front end, let's see if you can see this. Can you see how those arms, are pointing inwards towards one another? And also you'll notice with this one, this is an early version of it where they put this rubber cover on the inner cable and no spring, and that was correct in the early days. But there's something totally wrong with this, and it's probably either not adjusted or you'd have thought, well, maybe there's no shoes in it because this was a show bike, but there are shoes in it. The brake does work, but there's something wrong there, and you just think, well, does it just need adjusting up? But the trouble is, there's not enough slack in the cable, so we've got no adjustment left in that cable to open it out. And I think that's what the problem is that cable is too short, the inner's too short, and therefore they've had to leave the brake deliberately out of adjustment just to get the cable on. And it is one of these early cables with the grease nipple halfway up as well. So that's usually how I know when these brakes need some attention. So anyway, what we'll do then is, as I say, we've got the ferrules to fit, and as you can see, they slot into those holes, and you can see that each brake arm is split. So we can get the cable into the middle of it, and these just slot in. So let's set that up now, and I'll bring you back. Right, cable all connected up at the bottom end. I don't know whether you can see that too well, but the washer is on this side, and you can see that it prevents the ferrule with the nipple in it coming out this way and coming out of the arm on the inner side. And as I say, that was a later addition. So that's all done. The key to this is it's very easy to do this at the bottom end, as long as you totally disconnect the cable at the top here. If you try and keep the cable in at that end on the lowest adjustment, you'll be straining against the arms and the spring all the time. It's disconnect the cable at the top, install everything at the bottom end, and then it's a simple case of just compressing the arms at this end so you can get the cable nipple into the lever at the top end. Right, now what we'll do then is adjust this up, and we do that from the other side, and there it is. We find the hole in the drum, which normally is covered by a grommet, and we need to line that up with the first of the two, either one, doesn't matter which, the first of the two cams. So we've basically got to line it up with at that point on the other side. And actually, you might just be able to see the adjustment hole there. We're not far off. And actually what we'll do next is grab a torch. Decent torch. And have a look inside. In fact, so we're a little high here. Let me see if you can, if I can show you. I can see it, but you probably can't. Yeah, we're far too high. Anyway, the good news about this bike is we can lift it up so it sits on its back seat. Right. There it is. Right. Sorry about the delay. But there we go. Right. There it is. You've got it. There's a screw. So with a flat-ended screwdriver, we need to turn that clockwise on its verniers until it won't turn anymore, and then we back it off one click. So let's grab a screwdriver, which I should have done before. Here we go. Of course, I'm now doing this blind. Right, so it's over there. Oh. Okay, that's one done. And then we need to do exactly the same. 180 degrees. A bit around there somewhere. There it is. Spot on. Now I can actually see that. In that direction. There it is. Again, clockwise. You can hear it clicking on its vernier till it stops, and then back one click. Right. Now back on this side. Those two arms are beautifully positioned, so you can see they're just slightly out that way, outwards to the towards the bottom, just pointing away from one another at the cable ferrules. That's absolutely perfect. Now we know we're adjusted at that end. What we can do then is just take up the slack on the cable at this end. There's not too much. know it's working. There's still a bit of slack in that. Cable feels a bit spongy, really. Okay, it's about there. Maybe rubbing a little. Okay, happy with that. Not too bad. Obviously, once we do some road tests, we can adjust that up. But the thing is that as the brake shoes wear, then you're not just adjusting it here. What you should be doing is checking the verniers each time, because if you can take another 2 clicks forward and 1 click back, then you'll find you can take up less adjustment in the cable at the top. Right, that's that job done. Next job is to fit the throttle cables. So what we'll do is take both carb tops off first, remove the throttle cable adjuster there, because we're going to slightly drill that so we can put a ferrule that mounts directly into the top. So we'll get on with that now. Okay, there's the left hand carb done, and you can see how that cable ferrule slots in the slightly opened out hole that I've placed in there, and that's the correct way, so that we only have the adjuster on the choke side, which is correct. Just to show the ins before I slot in this one, the right hand carb. So as you can see, all I've done is slightly drill that out to accept that ferrule. And with respect to settings, it's number 3 slide, and the needle at number 1 slot, which is the top slot, so a linear setting on the needle side. So we'll just slot that in the other side, and this is really just to get the cable routing sorted out, and we can start buttoning and tidying up this lot now these cables are in place, because I am going to have to obviously take these out again once the bottom end choke cables arrived, and they're actually on the way now. So all I've got at the moment is the top cable into its junction box. I'm just waiting the 2, so we'll have to take these out again to put the choke slides in, but that's no great shakes. That's easy compared to getting this lot on. Right, I'll button that up, and then we'll start tidying up this all the cables around the top spine, and I'll show you what I use to do that. Right, throttle cables installed at the bottom end there, and also now onto the twist grip at the top end. But the bad news is, again, like everything that I've come across where we had bits and pieces missing, is that I don't have any ferrules to insert on the cables at the top here. So I've just ordered those. They'll be here in a couple of days, and the good news is that they just slot in, so I won't need to actually deinstall the cables at the top end, and then they slot in there, and once they're in, we'll adjust up the mid cable adjusters here. So almost there, but can't raise the throttles just yet, but that's okay anyway, because really all we wanted to do, as I say, was get the cables in place, so we can now think about beginning to tidy up the rungs across the top and get the metal tie wraps in place. And these are what I'm talking about. They usually have 2 sets of these. Because of the spine frame, you might have to double these up. And what I also tend to do as well, as we're tightening up around electrics, etc., is I usually get some shrink wrap, black shrink wrap, and cover these in black shrink wrap first before putting them on. So we'll begin to have a go at that and see if we can tidy up, at least get that big set of
electrical cable blocks sorted out, because they look a bit of a mess at the moment. There you go. That's better. Wiring tidied up no end, so we're all now nicely snug to the frame. What I did at the front end here was line up all the connectors and put a separate tie wrap around those to keep them all together, and then we've tie wrapped the whole lot with the aluminium wraps. And as I showed you, the shrink wrap on the underside, just to protect any sharp edges on the wiring in the loom. I can see the choke cable 2-in-2 odd box is still hanging out, but that'll tuck in okay once we get the 2 cables in on each side when they arrive, I think. Right, next thing. Now we can begin to think about not just tank fixing, we've sorted that out, but fuel taps for the tank. So I've got a couple of new taps. They look the same, but they're not. If you'll notice, that one hasn't got a pipe inside the filter, whereas this one has. So that's the normal running one, and that's the reserve. And originally the tab on that would have had an R stamped on it for reserve. I do have some stamps. I wonder if I should give it a go. Why not? Let's see if we can give it a go. Here they are then, not stamps really, but punches. KLMN OPQR. Give that a clean up. Yeah, it isn't. I think it is one. Of course, you'll see it in reverse, because it goes that way around. So that's an R. Right, we'll give that a clean up. We'll give it a go. Well, that didn't work too well. There's a sort of an R there. But anyway, at least I'll know the one with the mark on it is is reserve. And it's pretty much out of sight anyway. Right, there we are. Fuel taps on. Just cleaned up the threads lightly with a bit of lubricant, and the taps went in fine. The threads were good. And what I'm pleased about, and what I was aiming for, is that if you look parallel underneath, then you can't see that huge conglomeration of wires which sits under here. It's clear and not hanging down, so it's a nice clean look. at the front of the tank with just the 2 wires coming down for the horn then. There's one dangly wire over the other side there, and that's the, I've just got to tidy that up, that's the wire down to the oil pressure warning light switch, but that's easy enough to sort out once I start tacking the cables to the down tubes here. I've got the speedo cable to do yet, which also goes down that side, and then we'll tidy these up against the frame. So quite a lot achieved, bits and pieces to tidy up. So what's next? As I say, we're waiting for the 2 rear end choke cables, so we've got those to sort out when they arrive. They are on the way apparently, so I'm expecting those in the next couple of days. We've got the ferrules for the top of the throttle cables, effectively the stops for the twist grip. We've got to make up the fuel lines yet, but I've got the tubing and the terminators and the press to do that, so we'll make that look original. And then the final thing before we then have a start up is oils. So over in the distance there you can see a couple of cans on the bench, and what I aim to do is to fill up the oil reservoir, so 2050 in the spine frame, oil tank, gearbox oil, and then I'll just put some 2050. I haven't got straight 30, so I'll put some 2050 in the primary case, and that really is just to enable us then to use some electric rollers that I have to spin the engine up and get all the oil round, and then we'll check the oil pressure as well and make sure we're getting good pressure. So nearly there, so I'll leave it there for this episode for now. Thanks very much for watching, everybody. Thanks for any interest, comments and subscriptions, and we'll be back on this bike again in the next couple of days, where we'll sort out speedo cables, petrol lines, and when the parts arrive then finishing off the cabling, and we're just about there. Thanks again, everybody. See you again soon. Cheers. Bye bye.